Jimmy Hyams. How are you, Jimmy?
Caleb, I'm doing great. I hope you are as well.
Doing great as well. Jimmy, want to go ahead and dive right into it, actually, with today's tough question. And it actually involves Tennessee basketball because the bracketology numbers are out ahead of their final games of the season. And while it seems like they would have a clear path to a 1 seed, only two bracketologists, Jerry Palm and Joe Lenardi, had them as a 1 seed, but the net rankings have them at number 5. And I believe Fox Sports has them as a 2 seed. So just up front, out of the blue, or off the top, do you think right now they'd be a 1 seed or a 2 seed in the tournament?
Right now, I think they'd be a 1 seed. Now, there's also this thought process as well. Is the NCAA selection committee going to have 3 SEC teams in the top 4? Or 3 SEC teams going to get a 1 seed? That's certainly debatable. Duke and Houston have something to say about it. But right now, when I look at it, I think there's a pretty good case that Auburn's going to get a 1 seed, even though they lost to Texas A&M last night. And Tennessee, by virtue of its win over Alabama, by virtue of its 20-point win over Florida in the most recent contest, and by virtue of 8 wins over ranked opponents, I think Tennessee would get the 2 seed right now. Now, they got to win out to keep it. The number 1 seed. They got to win out to keep it. But I do think that they would get a 1 seed at this moment.
So you bring up the it's funny you brought up their win over Alabama in the Florida game. Obviously, Alabama and Florida play this week. Jimmy, my concern for Tennessee, and I brought this up yesterday, and then I want to dive into the actual question that might be a little bit debatable, but my concern for Tennessee is that we know the selection committee, based on recent history, has just thrown out the conference tournaments and not valued them at all with how they've seeded people unless you win. We also know they've relied heavily, primarily on the net rankings, but then the BPI right after that, and to a much lesser degree, the RPI, not as much as they used to. The reason I bring all that up is Tennessee already is behind Alabama in the net rankings at number 5, meaning Alabama would be the 4th number 1 seed if they just went by the net rankings. I think it's almost a certainty that the winner of Alabama-Florida will stay ahead of Tennessee in the net rankings to the end of the regular season, since Florida's number 6 behind Tennessee. I want to know your thoughts on that.
So you're saying that Alabama or Florida, that winner will move ahead of Tennessee?
Yes, in almost all the computer rankings that they do, I think it's a certainty.
Yeah, that could very well be the case. Now, how much is that committee going to rely on the net ranking? Are they going to look and say, which I don't know if they will or not, but they're going to look and say, hey, Tennessee without 2 starters beat Florida by 20. That's the most recent game that they played. And in the only head-to-head matchup against Alabama, they beat Alabama. So regardless of what the net rankings say, you can make an argument that Tennessee should be ranked ahead of both Florida and Alabama. Will the committee look at it that way? My gosh, I don't know. Committees have done some strange things in the past, as I think everybody would acknowledge. But I do think in this case that Tennessee, if it wins out, and I'm talking about the regular season, I think it would stay ahead. Not necessarily the net rankings, but I think as far as the selection committee, I think Tennessee would get the nod over Alabama and Florida.
All right, so let's ask the debatable question then, which is this. Based on the bracketologist yesterday, if Tennessee is a number 1 seed, they'll in all likelihood be the last number 1 seed. Even with Auburn losing, you're right, Auburn will stay ahead. I don't foresee Duke or Houston losing either their final regular season games, and I don't even think Duke would be punished that much if they lost at North Carolina over the weekend. So with that in mind, if they're the last number 4 seed, they're going to be in the West region and playing in San Francisco during the second weekend. I think given what we know now, and this was my hot take 2 weeks ago, and I want to know your thoughts. If I'm Tennessee at that point, I'd rather be the 2 seed in the Midwest or South regions where I know my fans are going to travel and I know I'll have home court advantage that next weekend against anybody I play, rather than being the 1 seed out in San Francisco where I'd be on a different time zone and I could effectively be playing road games depending on who the 2 and 3 seed are.
That makes sense. And I also know that Rick Barnes as a 2 seed has done very well in the tournament. He's been a 2 seed, according to what I saw the other day, 5 times. He's made a Final Four, 3 Elite Eights, and a Sweet 16 as a 2 seed. So 2 seeds, he's done well in that slot. And I look here's my thinking on that too. It would be nice to be the number 1 seed because you've never been the 1 seed, right? That would be a first for your program. There would be bragging rights. But at the end of the day, it matters more what you do in the tournament than where you're seated, right?
Totally agree.
Yeah, I don't really think it makes a whole lot of difference whether you're a 1 or a 2. Now, you don't want to drop behind a 2, I don't think. But for the logistics, for the geography that you mentioned, Tennessee might be better suited to be a 2 seed instead of a 1.
So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you what you'd rather do if you're a Tennessee fan. First, again, the show represented by Banks and Jones, Tennessee's trial attorney, play to win. Why settle? Banks and Jones, led by tscottjones.com.
Why Banks & Jones? Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks & Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks & Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks & Jones. T. Scott.
All right, Jimmy, if you're Tennessee, if you're Rick Barnes, if you're the players, would you rather the 1 seed in Atlanta or Indianapolis or the 2 seed in the 1 seed in San Francisco or the 2 seed in Atlanta or Indianapolis?
I'd rather the 2 seed in Atlanta or Indianapolis. I would prefer that. And as far as the opponent, there's not a whole lot of difference in playing the 16 seed or the 15 seed, right?
Exactly.
I mean, neither one of them are any good. If you don't win that game, shame on you. And I don't want to hear, oh, that's a tough matchup. No, you're playing a 15 or 16 seed, you ought to win. And then beyond that, who knows what's going to happen. And I have a thought on this, and I know that most people disagree, but I've heard people say it's all about matchups. I don't think it's all about matchups. I think it's about matchups, but also about how you play. You can play a team where you have a better matchup and shoot 30%, you lose. You can play a team that you say, boy, that's a tough matchup, but you shoot 50%, you win. So I think it's just as much about how you play as it is about the matchup that you face.
You know, it's funny you say that, Jimmy. I totally agree. And it's one of I usually don't like berating of media members at all. I never liked it with Nick Saban, but there's an old YouTube clip of Bobby Knight back in the 80s when someone said to him one time, it kind of amazes me how you guys could beat Northwestern by 50 at home and need overtime to beat them on the road. And Bobby Knight was like, it amazes you don't know basketball because basketball's full of that kind of thing. Whereas you have a team that plays a little bit better one day, one team plays a little bit worse, and you get a gigantic difference on the margins when that happens.
Well, look at Tennessee and Florida this year.
Yeah.
You go on the road and lose by 30 and you shoot terribly. And then at home without Ziegler and Milicic, you win by 20. So, it just depends a lot on how you play. And I've heard people say, well, it just depends on how the shots fall or whether the shots fall. Here's a little bit of my concern about that comment. That implies that defense doesn't matter. If shots fall, shots don't fall. No, defense has something to do with that, right? So,
Very true.
I mean, there's a reason Tennessee's defense is number 1 or has been number 1 in the nation in 3-point defense and one of the best defensive teams in the country on defensive efficiency. And only one team all year has outscored its average in playing against Tennessee. So it's not as simple as, well, the shots fall or they don't. Defense has something to do with that.
Right. And also defense and, as you were bringing up from the offensive side, shot selection. I mean,
Yes.
It's, a lot of times whether or not the shot falls depends on whether or not players were taking right shots. I mean, there's so many other factors that go into it. I totally agree. Do you think now let's ask this because some of the people on the other side will say, because you and I are on the same, I'd rather be the 2 seed in Indy or Atlanta. First, I guess the other region is Newark. So would you rather be the 2 seed in Newark or the 1 seed in San Francisco? Because at that point, is Newark really that's not really directionally an advantage for Tennessee, is it?
I would take Newark just because you're on the same time zone.
Yeah.
There can be an adjustment when you go 3 time zones away to San Francisco. So, and by the way, Tennessee's had its fair share of success in New York, and New Jersey ain't too far from New York. So I think just geographically, time zone wise, it would be to Tennessee's benefit to play in New Jersey as opposed to San Francisco.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that part of that is part of that's the draw. Now, so, the other devil's advocate part is some people say that if you're in the South region, you'll be stuck with Auburn as the 1 seed. But I mean, Tennessee almost beat Auburn at Auburn a few weeks ago. So it's not like they can't beat Auburn in the right situation. Now, do you think we both agree 15, 16 interchangeable? But do you think there becomes a big difference between like the 7th and the 8th seed or the 3 and the 4 seed? Is that where it could get tougher when they as the tournament goes on?
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, if you're a 3 or 4 seed, you're supposed to be better than a 7 or an 8. We have seen a ton of upsets, and we've seen some teams. The thing I wouldn't want to do, Caleb, and I would look at this. I don't want to play a team that gets really hot and seems to have found itself in February, leading into March, leading into the conference tournament. I want to stay away from that. I may have the year wrong, but I think it was 2011 when Connecticut was not going to make the NCAA tournament, and then they won 5 games in the Big East tournament, and then they won 6 games in the NCAA tournament, won the national championship. They got on a roll. And I look at some teams right now, like to me, one of the most dangerous teams in the country right now, and I know they're going to be a 1 seed, it's Houston. Look at how well Houston's playing. Duke is playing great right now. I wouldn't want to fool with them. I look at a team like Clemson. I think Clemson's really good. But I look at some teams that get hot late in the year. And maybe it's because they've had an injured player that's returned. Maybe it's because their chemistry has found itself. Maybe it's because people have identified their roles. But whatever it is, I think there's some really good teams out there that don't get a favorable seeding, but they get hot in February and in March, and they're very confident. I mean, look at the team that a few years ago were Tennessee under Conzo Martin ended up. They played in Dayton, right? And they made the extent. They were playing well late in the year. So those are the teams that scare me as much as the quote tough matchups.
That was the Conzo Martin story, though, wasn't it? They always started out slow in January, and then February would come, and they got hot. The problem was for the first of the 2 of the first 3 years, they had to. The January was so bad they couldn't overcome it to get to the NCAA tournament. Yeah, I agree. Getting hot at the right time is a huge part of this tournament. It's kind of a not as bad as the baseball tournament, but I mean, I would say, would you say March Madness? It's one of the more gimmicky ways to crown a champion, isn't it? Because of that.
Well, yeah, because you've got 68 teams that have. Well, let me rephrase that. You don't have 68 teams with a chance. You got probably 30 teams with a chance, I would say, maybe 25. So there are a bunch of them. I mean, the 15 or 16 seed, they may pull an upset, but they have no chance. You're giving a lot of automatic bids to conference champions that have no chance to win the NCAA tournament. They may have a chance to advance some, but they're not going to win it. So when you pare it down, you can get to who gets hot at the right time. And I mean, look how many times the NCAA tournament championship is won by a team that was not a 1 seed. It could have been a 3 seed. It could have been a 4 seed. Was NC State a 6 seed back in 1983? Something like that.
I'm not sure, actually.
They weren't, and they had to win in overtime, I think, against Pepperdine in their first game of the tournament before they got rolling. So you can win it if you're anywhere between a 1 or a 6 seed. History has proven that. But just because you're 1 seed, I mean, it's rare. It's rare that 3 1 seeds make it to the Final Four. And I don't think we've ever seen 4 1 seeds make it, right? I don't
One time. It was 2008. 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, Memphis, Kansas, UNC, and UCLA were all 1 seeds, but that's the only time.
Yeah, so that's rare.
Right.
It's rare when that happens. So, I mean, if you're a 2 seed, 3 seed, 4 seed, you have just about as good a chance to make the Final Four as if you're a 1 seed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. And I mean, at this point, the most important thing is getting in. So before we move on from this, I mean, we're in the last week of the season. I know you talk about getting hot, but Tennessee's they're not thin, but they're not necessarily the deepest team right now in basketball. Do you think Rick Barnes should maybe focus on trying to, rather than making sure he wins a tough road game at Ole Miss or goes far in the SEC tournament, should focus on making sure his players are fresh and well rested for the NCAA tournament more than anything else at this point?
I think so. But I'm also, and I think you were alluding to this, I'm a little bit concerned about Tennessee's bench right now. I mean, to me, Donnie Stone Dubar has been a big disappointment. I expected a whole lot more out of him. Cade Phillips is a better player than he was a year ago, but he has a propensity to pick up 2 quick fouls and go sit back on the bench. To me, the only guy coming off the bench that you can really rely on is Gainey, right?
Right.
So that's really thin. That's a really thin team. So if you get in foul trouble with your starter or a starter, I just don't think Tennessee's bench is that dependable. And I think that could be a concern in the NCAA tournament. In particular, this is just my opinion. Others may argue. Seems to me like in the NCAA tournament, they blow the whistle quicker. I don't think they let them play as much as they do sometimes in the regular season, and the officials take over. And if they start calling 40 fouls in the first half, Tennessee's in trouble because I don't think Tennessee's bench is that strong.
Yeah, I agree. But I've always said I'm the one grump who doesn't like March Madness the way everybody else does for two reasons. And you said one of them. I think the officials overblow the whistle. But because of the moment, I think everybody who's in the tournament, and just on a broad scale, give me your thoughts on this. I think everybody in the tournament tries to see it as their moment to become a star. And that includes the officials blowing the whistles. But it also includes, I think it's the most overcoached tournament in basketball. I mean, in sports. And what I mean is there seems to be a lot of extra coaching instead of letting guys play a lot of times by people on certain teams. What are your thoughts on that?
It almost reminds me of baseball teams in the playoffs where they start relief pitchers, and then they'll throw a relief pitcher 2 innings, and the next guy comes in for 2 innings. They totally get away with what they did in the regular season by just going with their rotation. So yeah, I think there's some of that goes on. Here's the thing that'd be interesting too when you get in NCAA tournament time, and this doesn't just apply to Tennessee, but it could be applicable. So if your star player, let's say, Zakai Ziegler gets 2 fouls in the first 4 minutes, are you going to bench him?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And what Tennessee did the other day against Alabama, Ziegler gets 2 fouls in the first 4 minutes. They bench him, bring him back in the 7-minute mark. Then they take him out with about a minute and a half left in the first half. He ended up playing about 10 minutes in the first half. Would that be what Rick Barnes does in the NCAA tournament game? Or does he leave him on the bench to make sure he doesn't get that 3rd foul in the first half? The other part of that is Ziegler is such a veteran player that I think you can leave him on the court with 2 fouls, and he knows how to avoid getting a 3rd one. So there are just a lot of different ways to look at it, but I do think there is overcoaching in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I agree. What you bring about with baseball is great. What it reminds me of is on like Sunday night or Monday Night Football, you'll see an offensive coordinator get away from like on a 3rd and 1, just get the first down, and they'll try to call a creative play action, and you can tell it's like they're trying to dial up a play to get a head coaching job, and at the end of the year, it feels like.